Okay, good morning, class. So this is the last section of the swine nutrition part of Animal Science 143. So today we'll discuss growing finishing pig nutrient recommendations and feeding management. And so again, thank you for coming in today. When we talk about the nutrition of growing finishing pigs, we always say that feed is about 60 to 80%, and in this example, I use 75% of the total cost of production. But when we break down the feed budget, about 75% of that is spent in the grower finisher phase. So which tells us that when we talk about reducing cost, then it is important that we think about the grower finisher diets because it is the largest contributor to our feed cost. So any improvements in feed efficiency in this phase would have a big impact on the profitability of the entire operation. So what are the objectives of feeding growing finishing pigs? So often we would think about performance. So that will be improve the growth rates, increase feed conversion, maximize carcass lean. But at the end, it is really reducing cost and improving our environmental sustainability. And that is by minimizing our nutrient output. So these are some of the important considerations that we think about when we feed our growing finishing pigs. So to start with, we need to have an idea of what is good and what is bad. And so I have here three different levels of performance, and I have it good, better, and best. And you have their feed conversion ratio or FCR, average daily gain, protein deposition rate, which is the amount of protein or muscle that is accreted per day, and then you have percent mortality. So for good, if we have a feed efficiency of 3, an ADG of 750, and this is from weaning to marketing. Okay, so this is ADG from weaning, which is at day 35, to marketing. So let's say at 100 kilograms. So if we get ADG of 750, a protein deposition rate of 110%, 110 grams per day, and post-weaning mortality of 2%, then that is good. But if we have a feed efficiency of 2.6, an ADG of 900 grams, a protein deposition rate of 135, and mortality that's almost zero, then that is exceptional and that is best. And so as a producer and also as a nutritionist, that is what we try to achieve for. Now, we have to go back to the basics for us to understand what is expected from us when feeding these growing finishing pigs. So performance or performance conformation is what we call phenotype. So remember, phenotype is the summation of the impact of genetics and the environment. And you might probably have learned that you also add the interaction of genetics and environment. But when we break it down, the environment can be divided into the impact of health, the impact of housing, the impact of management, the impact of nutrition. So nutrition is only part of the environment. It is the biggest cost contributor, but it only is a part of the environment. So genetics is the main determinant of performance, but how we provide the rest of the environment, that would then dictate how much we can reach the potential or genetic potential of the animals that we are feeding. So when it comes to growing finishing pigs, our ultimate goal is precision feeding. So if you go back to that slide where we talk about how we could develop a profitable feeding program, so you have their nutrient supply and then you have nutrient requirements. And so precision feeding essentially is matching the requirements with the supply, or vice versa, the supply to the requirements. And what we try to achieve is to develop feeding programs that will maximize the response of the population at the lowest possible cost. So, ibig sabihin nito, pag pinapakain natin yung ating mga growing finishing pigs, hindi natin sila pinapakain para mag-perform ang isang individual animal. It has to be the performance of the population. Okay, so this is also something that we have discussed in Animal Science 102, so hopefully this is not new to you. So this is what we call the linear plateau concept, and what this shows is the relationship between energy intake, or feed intake for that matter, and lean growth rate. So when we talk about pork, that's muscle, and so it's important to think about the growth rate of the muscle or the lean. And so when we increase energy intake, there is increasing lean growth rates until it reaches a point of energy intake where there will be no more further increase in lean growth rate. So that is what we call the plateau. So yung point where you have the inflection, where you have the bend between the linear and the plateau, that is the required, the optimal energy intake. Because beyond that, you no longer have any improvements in growth rates. So this is what we call the linear plateau concept. So if we relate that to, let's say, the effect of genotype. So let's say you have a high lean genotype and a moderate lean genotype. So if we look at the linear plateau concept, what we see here is that the moderate lean has a lower slope compared to the high lean, which means that at the same energy intake, the high lean genotype is accreting more lean for the same amount of energy intake. And then the other difference here is the inflection point. So for the moderate lean, at a lower energy intake, it already plateaus and there is no more increase in lean growth rate, while the high lean genotype keeps on increasing and then it reaches its plateau. So what we see here is a difference in lean growth rates between the two genotypes, and which also means that to achieve that potential, they require a higher level of energy intake. That's why one of the most important questions that we should have, or we should ask a farmer, is what is your genotype? Because knowing the genotype would then tell you how you would design the diets, the specifications that you would use to maximize the potential of the animals that they have in the farm. Now, again, if we look at the same concept, but this time look at gender. So you have here three lines. You have their boars, gilts, and barrows. And this time, instead of energy, let's look at protein and lysine. And so you have increasing levels of dietary lysine on the x-axis, and you have average daily gain on the y-axis. And the same can be seen. So you see there, barrows, you have a linear portion, and then at a certain point in time, at the same lysine intake, gilts and barrows have higher average daily gain. And that tells you a difference in the utilization of nutrients between gender. Then the other difference is the inflection point. So for barrows, reach the plateau earlier than both gilts and then barrows. That's why one of the key things that we also try to know is the gender of the pigs that we are feeding. Typically, we have both males and females, but there are some feeding systems where males, which are barrows, and gilts are being raised separately, because by feeding them differently, then we can maximize the potential of both gender. So that is the same concept as we've discussed earlier. Now, if we look at the linear plateau response as pigs grow, so you have here a slide where you have the linear plateau response from 12, 35, 50, 60, 70, 90, 110, and 130 kilos. So what we will notice is that as energy intake increases, the slope of the line decreases as body weight decreases. So what does this mean? It means that the efficiency of utilizing energy decreases in time. And that is also the reason why when you look at feed efficiency numbers, in younger animals, the feed efficiency is a lower number, which means they can utilize less feed for the same amount of weight gain. But as they grow older, their ability to utilize the same nutrient becomes poorer. And that's why feed efficiency decreases in time. Okay? The other thing that you'll see here is that at 70 kilos, they already plateau. Okay? So at this point, pigs continue to grow, but instead of lean deposition, you already have fat deposition. So if we are not watching the amount of energy that we are providing to these pigs, then there will be a big chance that you will have fat pigs. And farmers and buyers do not want fat pigs. So it's really important that at this period in time, we make sure that we are not feeding excess amounts of energy so that we have better control of back fat. So what you've noticed here is that we talked about energy. And again, the reason why I talked about energy is because when we deal with growing finishing pigs, dietary energy is the key factor that impacts profitability. So how we manage dietary energy, the amount of energy that we provide to the pigs, would be the biggest factor that would affect profitability. So how do we design feeding programs for growing finishing pigs? So here we have an example of the requirements of pigs from 7 to 100 kilograms. So this is a requirement for SID lysine, which is digestible lysine, per unit of energy, in this case ME. And it decreases in time from 7 kilos to 100 kilos. So to meet the requirements of the pigs that we are feeding, we typically divide this into phases. Okay? So for example, as you see in the black, we divide it into 4 feeding phases. So that may be your starter, grower, finisher 1, finisher 2. So that will be your phases. And that is the purpose of those phases. So that is called the phase feeding program. And that is to feed according to the requirements of the pigs. But what we realize here is that there are periods in time that we are meeting the requirement, but there are also periods in time that we are overfeeding nutrients. So pigs would grow in this period, but we are just spending more money on nutrients that they don't really need. They don't really need to grow more. And so those are excess nutrients, and that leads to inefficiencies. The other way around, you also have periods that you are underfeeding nutrients. So that means you are feeding below the requirement, and that also negatively affects feed efficiency. So one way to improve. So the next aspect is determining the nutrient requirements, and there are a number of factors that influences nutrient needs. So we have genetics, we have phase of production, we have health status, gender, equipment, environment, and overall management. So these are all factors that has a big impact on the nutrient needs of the animal. So that is the reason why one of our objectives in developing feeding programs for finishing pigs is to understand all these factors that is involved in maximizing performance and adjusting our diet formulations accordingly to ensure that we achieve optimal production at an economical cost. So the first question that we ask then is, what is the basis of the requirement? Now, nutrient requirements may be based on different parameters. So for example, is it based on maximum daily gain or maximum growth rates? Is it based on optimal feed efficiency? Is it based on best carcass quality? Is it based on the efficiency of lean deposition? Or is it based on minimum nitrogen and phosphorus excretion? So these are all different criteria that we can use as a basis for nutrient requirements. So for example, let's take a look at this study by Brown. And what you have here, you have an experiment where they fed pigs increasing levels of dietary lysine to determine the nutrient requirements of these pigs. So for this particular slide, it is looking at average daily gain. So what we see here is that as dietary lysine increased, average daily gain increased from 0.35 to somewhere around 0.55, and then beyond that, increasing levels of lysine did not improve average daily gain. So again, the break point or the plateau is the requirement. So in this example, the break point was 0.51%. So that is the requirement for optimal or maximum ADG. When they look at feed efficiency, so obviously feed efficiency, the lower the number, the better. So they saw a decrease in feed efficiency as dietary lysine increased from 0.35 to somewhere around 0.65. But beyond that, there were no more improvements in feed efficiency. And the break point for feed efficiency was around 0.62%. So 0.62 is a higher number than 0.51, which means that the requirement to maximize feed efficiency is higher than to maximize average daily gain. And then finally, they look at loin composition or muscle composition. And what they saw is that it increased from 0.35 to 0.65. And then beyond that, they saw a decrease in loin composition. And when they looked at the break point was 0.64%. So again, if we compare that to 0.61 for feed efficiency and 0.51 for average daily gain, it is a number that is higher than both. So which means that the requirement to maximize loin composition is higher than for feed efficiency or for gain. And that's what we call hierarchy of requirements. So nutrient requirements is dependent on the criteria. And so the lowest requirement is to maximize ADG, followed by feed efficiency, and then for carcass quality, it is higher. That's why it's important for us to know when we are designing diets, to know what are the combination of factors that makes the farm more profitable. So you ask them, what is your value system? What is more important to you? So if the producer has their own meat shop, they are producing their pigs to sell in their meat shop, then carcass composition or leanness is an important parameter to them, much more important than just growth rate. So I would then design diets with higher specifications for that farm compared to, let's say, another farm who does not have a meat shop and just selling commercial pigs to the viajeros. So to them, what is only important is maybe growth rate. So the design of the diets will be different in those two scenarios. Now, there are two ways that we express nutrient requirements. So the first is as percent concentration of the diet. So what you see here, this is from 5 kilograms to 135 kilograms, and you have the percent digestible lysine requirement of those pigs. So what you see is that as body weight increases, the percent SID lysine requirement decreases. Now, you can also express it as amount of nutrient per day or nutrient intake per day. So this is let's say lysine on a gram per day, and what we could see, it's the opposite. As body weight increases, SID lysine intake increases, and then it plateaus, and then it decreases slightly. So the next question then is, what is the better way of expressing nutrient requirements? So let's have an example. Let's say I have a 4-phase feeding program. Phase 1 is from 25 to 50, then 50 to 75, 75 to 100 is phase 3, and then 100 to 135 is my phase 4. So based on the book, this is the requirement from 0.98, 0.85, 0.73, and 0.61. And then the lysine intake per day, so from 14.8, 17.9, 18.3, and then 16.9. So if I know the feed intake, okay, so this is the feed intake, the actual feed intake of the farm on the 4 phases. If I calculated the estimated digestible lysine intake, that is essentially 1.3 kilograms feed intake times 0.98% lysine. That will give me 12.7 grams of lysine per day. And that is lower than the requirement. So it's 1.14 grams lower than the requirement. Okay. Oh, sorry. So that is lower than the requirement. So for me to get 14.8 grams per day, I need to increase my SID lysine. So to get 14.8, what I need to have in my phase 1 diet is 1.14% digestible lysine. Okay, so for a phase 2, it should be 0.94 instead of 0.85. And then for phase 3, it should be 0.8 instead of 0.73. And then finally for phase 4, 0.65 instead of 0.61. So this tells us that the more important basis of requirements is the intake per day. So if we know the actual intake of the feed intake in the farm, we can then adjust the levels in the diet so that we can meet the requirements. So remember, pigs do not have a daily requirement for absolute quantities of nutrients. Pigs have a daily requirement for absolute quantities of nutrients, not as a percent of the diet. So when you are asked what is the requirement for lysine in a nursery pig diet, then do not say on a percent basis. It should be on a gram per day basis. Okay. So nutrient allowances expressed on a daily basis is relatively constant, and that relates to the pig's nutrient needs for both maintenance plus the requirement for production. Now, one of the other thing about grower-finisher diets is alternative ingredients. So our objective is to reduce feed costs. So the logical option there is to use these cheaper byproducts that is available in the market. Examples are rice bran, copra meal, cassava meal, palm kernel meal, wheat pollard, DDGS. So the question then is, does using high fiber ingredients really reduce feed cost? So if you remember our discussions in Animal Science 102, you have fiber, dietary fiber in these ingredients. And as it has been shown in many studies, as NDF or as fiber level increases in the diet, energy digestibility decreases. And that is true for growing pigs and also for adult pigs, which are sows or boars. So because of this lower energy digestibility, it negatively impacts performance. So here we have a study where you have increasing levels of NDF or neutral detergent fiber, and then you have the bars, the blue bars, as average daily gain of the pigs, and the red line as the feed efficiency. And what you could see here, the diets or the pigs that were fed the diets with the lowest fiber had the highest gain and the lowest feed efficiency. And as we increase NDF, the average daily gain decreased and the feed efficiency became poorer. Another impact of high fiber ingredients in finishing pig diets is a reduction in carcass yield. So here we have an experiment and just focus on the two bars at the ends. Okay, so you have the corn soy diet and then you have the high fiber diet. And this is carcass yield. This is slaughtered already and you remove the visceral organs. You have removed the blood. And so that is your carcass weight, hot carcass weight. And you divide that by your live weight times 100, that's carcass yield. So in the corn soy diet, the carcass yield was 74%. For the high fiber diet, it's 72.8%. So that is a difference of more than a percent difference. If they looked at carcass weight, the difference in carcass weight was almost 4 kilograms between the two treatments. That 4 kilograms less of product. And the reason why you have lower carcass yield is because of the following. So you see the pigs fed all corn soy diets have lower full large intestinal weight compared to the pigs that were fed high fiber diets all throughout. And so high fiber diets lead to an increase in visceral organ weight, and that's why we see a reduction in carcass yield. So when we tie it back to economics, so here we have a study. The blue is pigs fed low fiber, which is about 9.3% NDF, and the red is high fiber diet, which contains about 19% NDF. So when we look at economic return, yes, feed cost is cheaper in pigs fed the high fiber diets, and feed cost per kilogram of gain is also lower in pigs fed high fiber diets. But when it comes to profit, which is margin over feed cost, pigs fed the high fiber diets were 5% lower than pigs fed the low fiber diet. And so at the end of the day, yes, the high fiber diets were cheaper, but because there is less weight, there's less carcass, then that would mean less profit. So the advantages of reducing the cost in the diet was not large enough to improve profitability. So when we are feeding, growing, finishing with high fiber diets, yes, we reduce feed costs, but it increases feed intake and makes feed efficiency poorer. It makes caloric efficiency poorer, meaning the use of energy becomes lesser, and then it reduces both carcass weight and carcass yield. So yung iniisip natin na nakatipid tayo sa paggamit ng maraming byproducts, yes, bumaba ang cost ng feed per kilo o per bag, pero yung kita naman ng farmer ay mas maliit. So at the end of the day, it's really profit that is more important. Okay, when we also think about high fiber ingredients, we also need to think about its effects on the physical characteristics of the feed. So, halimbawa, this is a bin outside of the building where we put feed. So, let's say it's a bin for 500 kilos. And so feed is placed inside the bin, and then when feed needs to be placed inside the building, an auger runs. So the feed from the bin falls down, and then it is brought by the auger into the building. But if you have high fiber ingredients, it may negatively affect the flowability of the feed. So that's why you see here feed bridging. So the feed is not falling down into the auger. So that will lead to what we call out-of-feed events. So you expect to have feed in the feeder, but there is no feed in the feeder. So this is an example also of feed bridging. So if you have high fiber ingredients, the feed falls down on the feeder ununiformly. I don't know if that's the right word, but it is not uniform. That's what I meant. So you have then segregation of the feed. So the heavier parts fall first, and then you have the fine parts retained in the feeder. So that can then lead to less uniform feed. That may impact performance. And then you have what we call the out-of-feed events. So feed does not fall into the feeder. When the farmer finds out there is no feed, you start the auger and fix it. And so when feed is now in the feeder, all of the pigs starts fighting for the feeder. And that leads to severe stress that can have a negative impact on performance. So we need to balance. When we think about alternative feed ingredients in growing finishing diets, we have to balance the lower feed cost with the effects on performance, carcass quality, the extra cost of quality control, the extra cost on logistics cost, as well as the negative effect on feed mill capacity. So if cost is still heavier, the reduction in cost still heavier than these other parameters, then yes. But if not, then it's better to stick on a high density diet. So when we think about growing, finishing, feeding programs, okay, what is more important? What is the value of improving production efficiency? So let's say I have two brands of feed, feed A and feed B. So I'm sure you have friends, Brads or Cises, that are working for a feed company, either as a nutritionist or a salesman or a sales representative. And they're selling the two feed. Okay? So let's say A, the average price of the feed from starter to finisher is 750 pesos, while B, it's 820 pesos. So feed B or brand B is a much more expensive diet. But for brand B, yes, it is expensive, but it takes almost 3 weeks shorter to reach 85 kilos from 15 kilos. And average daily gain is greater, and feed efficiency is better. So when I look at my production cost using feed B is almost 5 pesos lower, and my net profit is 5 pesos greater than using the cheaper feed A. So if I calculate my net profit per pig, if my pig is 85 kilos, that will give me an extra 400 pesos per pig. If I have 10 pigs sold, that is 4,000 pesos more than using feed A. So what is the value of production efficiency? The better the feed efficiency, the better is the profitability. So this, I think, should be the guide in choosing feeding programs for our farmers. So feed efficiency, there are numerous factors that impacts feed efficiency. So you have high feed disappearance. So if you have high feed disappearance, then that leads to poorer feed efficiency. And you have a number of factors that can affect that. Obviously, feed wastage is one. So if we want to improve production efficiency, the first thing that you look for is feed wastage. If you can reduce feed wastage, which is typically around 10 to 20%, that is an easy way of improving feed efficiency. Genetics can play a role. Some genetics have a capacity to waste more feed than others, so you choose the right genetics. Temperature, under hot environment, there's higher feed wastage. Mortality is a big factor. Imagine if you have pigs that you grew from 15 to 80 kilos and then about a week away from selling, they die. So what does that mean? It means that you fed that pig from 15 to 80 kilos for how many months and then get nothing. And that is also high feed disappearance because feed was wasted, and that leads to poorer feed efficiency. So we don't want mortalities in the end. It's better to have mortalities early than mortalities in the end of the finishing phase. So other factors like feed delivery, amino acid deficiency, they can also lead to feed disappearance or feeding low energy, high fiber diets. Okay. Now low ADG will also negatively affect efficiency because you have this amount of feed, and then if there is low gain, low growth rate, then that is poor feed efficiency. So disease, genetics, feed availability, water availability, diet deficiency, and temperature, all of these factors can lead to poorer feed efficiency. And then finally, other factors like particle size and diet form, they can also play a role in improving feed efficiency. So particle size of the grain is an important factor in improving feed efficiency. So here you have corn ground in different sizes, in different particle sizes. So from 500 microns to as high as 1,200 microns. So the lower, the finer is the grind. And what has been shown in the past is that as you reduce the particle size, for example, every 100 micron reduction, you get a 1.2% improvement in feed efficiency. And that is easy to understand because you reduce the particle size, you increase the surface area of the grain for digestion, and that will then improve nutrient digestibility. That's why you see the improvement in feed efficiency. Again, this is a slide I showed in the nursery section. So just like in nursery pigs, feeding pellets versus mash improves feed efficiency by an average of 7%. That is ranging from 3 to 12%. But there is a warning here. If the diets will be pelleted, make sure that the diets are, or make sure that the pellets are of good quality. So if you look at this picture, so you have the feeder, you have pellets in the hopper of the feeder, but in the pan where the pigs are eating, it's already ground mash. So what is the impact of that on performance? So here is a study that looked at the effect of pellet quality on feed efficiency. So you have mash or meal, and then you have good pellets. And so you see here a big improvement, 13 FCR points improvement in feed efficiency. But if you have pellets with fines, at least 20% fines, you already get feed efficiency that's just the same as mash. So the benefit of pelleting was lost. So pelleting is extra cost, and so if you pellet, make sure that you get the benefit, because if not, then you are just going to lose money. So make sure that you monitor for pellet quality. Now another factor is the feeder design. Now there are many different types of feeders, and the differences between these feeders is its ability to reduce feed wastage. And so if you go around different farms around the Philippines, you'll see different kinds of feeders that you see here in this picture, from the rotary feeders, that's the round ones, to dry feeders, and then you also have what you call wet dry feeders, where you have a drinker in the feeder. So when they are eating, they can access the drinker and do what we call wet feeding. So this is an example. So this is some work that we did comparing dry feeder versus wet dry feeders. And what we've seen with wet dry feeders is that average daily gain is better when pigs are eating in wet dry feeders, because feed intake is higher with the same feed efficiency. That's why at the end they are about 3.3 kilograms heavier. So that can more than pay for the cost of the wet dry feeders. Now, the other thing that is affected by the type of feeder is feeder stocking rate. So for example, here you have two types of feeders. You have the dry feeder and the wet dry feeder. And then you have two forms of the feed. You have mash feed and pellet feed. And what you see here is that in the dry feeder, when they are fed mash, it takes longer for pigs to eat the same amount of feed compared to pellets. And since it takes them longer, they take more space. That's why the stocking rate, or the pigs per feeding space, is much less when they are fed mash versus pellet when they are on a dry feeder. So 13 pigs only if they are fed mash per feeding space, while if it's pelleted, it's 24 pigs per feeding space. But if you are using a wet dry feeder, there is no difference between mash and pellets in terms of eating time. That's why the stocking rate is almost the same. And then again, feeder adjustment. So last time we talked about nursery pigs. The one at the bottom is a grower finisher pen. So this is what it looks like. This is the proper feeder adjustment for growing finishing pens. So this is maximizes intake with optimal reduction of feed wastage. So our take-home message for this section is that the value of a feeding program is more than just a set of diet formulations. So farmers, including nutritionists, should focus on factors that will either decrease feed costs without affecting productivity. We need to continuously look at factors that will increase the revenue or profit, and then the increase in revenue must always be greater than the increase in feed costs. So with that, thank you very much. I hope that you enjoyed our short and brief time to talk about swine nutrition. If you do have any questions in the future, feel free to come by and talk to me. I'll be happy to help you. And so I wish you all the best in the rest of your ANSI 143 and then in your future careers. So thank you. Bye.